We're delighted as Root and Branch to welcome Ruby with us this afternoon. Ruby is a name that I've followed for a long time as one of the few prominent women speaking out in the LGBT Christian campaign movement. Ruby is an LGBT rights campaigner and lecturer. She was born in Jodhpur, India, the youngest of 4 children of Ascension, an Air Force pilot, and Emma. She spent the formative years of her life travelling because of her father's work before moving to England at the age of 11. Reared in a deeply religious family, the family's identity was both strongly Catholic and Indian from an early age. After moving to England, she attended a Catholic school in Richmond before embarking on a decades-long career in the media industry. Training at the National Catholic Media and Radio Centre in North London, she produced documentaries and then formed her own video production company, primarily working for clients in the community sector. For several years, she worked as a senior lecturer at London Metropolitan University, imparting to students her passion for media. Quest, Ruby's organisation, has raised the profile of LGBT Catholics significantly, and she also somehow, within her campaigning work, manages to radiate joy, and I've often felt this has significant challenges for those who oppose equality. So welcome, Ruby. Looking forward to what you've got to say to us this afternoon, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely intro. I need to say that I'm not very, how shall I put it, comfortable being in the limelight. I often like to be behind the scenes, working, beavering away. It's for, it's no, how should I say, my mission in life was to be behind the camera and to observe the world. So that was no accident that used to be my natural place. But interestingly, in life, it pushes you beyond your boundaries. So I ended up becoming a lecturer, which meant always being in front of people. I learned to become part of training people in how to present themselves in media. So, you know, I couldn't hide away all the time. And certainly in my line of work, in industry and then getting into the LGBT world, things happen. I call them by accident, but I know that, you know, someone up there is kind of orchestrating things and getting me into spaces that I never considered I would do. So let me start by sharing the screen. Oops. Right. I'll go to the first slide. Okay, so I've been involved with various organizations, but they came to me fairly later in life. My life was just filled with doing things, you know, in media, because that's what I was going to do. I was going to be the most amazing documentary filmmaker ever. But I didn't want to work in the commercial side of it. I didn't want to work in broadcast. I was happy working in the community sector. And that's where really my politics, my awakening in politics, you know, during those dark years of Margaret Thatcher, and certainly when Section 28, you know, really kicked in, where you could not talk about and you couldn't educate students about the LGBT world. I remember really, you know, all my friends in the community sector were of all types, of religious persuasions and sexual representations. So it kind of bothered me a lot. And it's really then when I became quite politicized about the injustices of life. But to be quite honest, it was still something that, you know, my work world was very separate from my religious world. You know, I was fully embedded in both, but they were very separate. And that carried on for quite a while until, you know, I think it happens to most people, you know, your parents die. And my parents dying was actually, and that happened in 2003. They both, and I loved them very, very dearly, they both passed away 7 weeks apart. So it was quite a traumatic time for me. And my long-term relationship had also sort of fizzled out by that stage. So I had to do a lot of, I'd say introspection, but also reaching out. So I did the age-old thing, you know, I got on the computer and I typed in gay, woman, Asian, you know, keywords, and all these organizations popped up. Oh, I'm Catholic, by the way. And all these organizations popped up, most of whom I knew because I'd worked in the community sector a lot, so I knew most of them. And then this organization called Quest came up. I hadn't a clue what it was, except that it was Catholic. And I thought, oh, let me check this out. And I remember telling my friends about it, and they said, oh, Ruby, they sound like Jesus creepers. You know, they wear Jesus creepers and they just do the Hail Mary and the Rosary. I said, well, if that's what they are, I'm not going to be hanging around a lot. And I remember the first event I went for, they were all men, surprise. There was one gentleman who actually was just so charming and welcoming and had the biggest smile ever. And I have to say, if it wasn't for him, I would not have gone back. And he was a wonderful gentleman, Derek Arendt, who sadly passed away a few years ago. But he welcomed me there, and I felt, okay, I'm the only woman, but I'm going to hang in there, and I'm going to see how this goes. And so that went on fine. I joined the London group. By the way, I need to tell you, I'm taking you on a journey, and the journey is really to give you a sense of what that, the navigation that I had to go through, and then, you know, where we're at in terms of my experiences. And I'm sure there'll be many things that come up for you on this. So, you know, I crave your indulgence while I take you on this journey. So, so I discovered Quest, and I have to say, you know, it wasn't the bright, shiny image that you get from this logo now. It was very much what seemed to me a very secretive organization. I couldn't understand it. There was no information on it. You went onto the website, which is very old and clunky, but that's fine because it didn't have any money. But there was no sense of who they were. And certainly the London group were wonderful, but they were almost seemed to me like caught in a time warp of, you know, 20 years ago. But they were interestingly welcoming, which was nice. There was a women's group which I joined, which was great. We went every month on social walks, cinema, theatre, whatever, you know, just to socialise. And every month we got 15, 20 women, and that was great. And men were welcome, so you had the odd gentleman who would join us. And then suddenly the balance shifted. More and more men started coming, and there were less and less women coming. And the then women's officer was desperate to leave, and she just grabbed hold of me and said, please, Ruby, will you do it? And I said, oh, okay, don't know what this entails, but I'll do it. And when that change happened, where there were more men than women, I actually said, this is ridiculous. Let's not call it the women's group. Let's just call it the social group. But this seemed to be the pattern, that the moments when there were women, men engaged, women seemed to leave. And I couldn't understand that. And very often the women would say to me, oh, there's always men here. I said, well, of course there are men here. That's because you're not here. You have to take up your place. But somehow the women didn't want to be where men were. My engagement with Quest generally has been that the men have been incredibly welcoming and supportive. Maybe they just saw me as the anomaly. God, there's this woman who won't go. Maybe there's something about her. Maybe we need to try and work with her. Generally, the women left. But once I kind of got into the role of the women's officer, then I was asked if I'd like to become the national women's officer, which I did. And it's at that point that I became deputy chair within the organization. I should explain this, the regional groups as they were then, the local groups, and then the national organization. So I was part of the London group and part of the national group. So when I was on the national committee as the national women's officer, I went for my first conference, and the keynote speaker was the wonderful Tina Beattie. You've been talking about her earlier. And she did a wonderful talk. And I remember going up to her afterwards and said, Tina, that was a lovely talk. You've been talking about women, but have you noticed there are only 2 women, that's you and myself, at this conference? And for me, that was a real shock that there were no women. And I decided then that I was going to ensure that we got more women coming on to that conference. And that's when this thing called, what I call Champagne Gate happened, which is the then chair, wonderful, wonderful gentleman called Mark Dowd. He agreed that we should have a pre-conference for women. And us women, we were going to fund it. We were going to buy the champagne. We were going to buy the strawberries. And we were going to have a gathering before the main conference. I have to say that didn't go down very well with the men. Not all the men, some of the men. They felt that I was overstepping my mark. That why were we, meaning the men, spending money on women? And I said, you're not spending any money. I am, and the other women are. Anyway, Mark agreed it should go ahead, and he said, I can't see any reason why I shouldn't, and we did. And I think over 4 years of consistently doing it each year, we managed to get more and more women to come. We created a space that said, this is for us. This is where we can talk about things, we can meet, we can socialize, we can have a bit of fun and then join the main conference. And I have to say, after that, we got 10 women, then we got 15 women. And when we got a regular set of women engaging with Quest, we decided we didn't need to have the champagne and strawberries, a pre-conference, a welcome. And that takes time. It doesn't happen straight away. You know, you have to work at these things. So that's what we did. And then when I became chair, my commitment was to meet with every bishop where we had a local group. That was my promise. And I do remember at that conference being warned or being told, be careful, you know, because you're dealing with a hierarchy. They're going to, you know, try and manipulate you. And that's really was born out of the bad experiences that members in Quest had with the hierarchy. You know, don't do it, it's dangerous. But I was determined I was going to do that. And my first port of call was to meet with the then Archbishop Vincent Nichols, with the then deputy chair, who's a wonderful, wonderful gentleman, Michael Bennett, who sadly passed away. And in that meeting, you know, the age-old story was brought up about Quest, the problem group, the dissenting group, you know, the toxic group, all those labels that were thrown at Quest from an incident that happened way back before my time that didn't interest me in terms of what we were doing now. It was interesting in terms of the history and the obvious pain that people went through at the time. And it was that we were put into the Westminster Directory by wonderful Cardinal Basil Hume, who was a good friend to Quest. But we were then asked at a conference, again, before my time, at the conference, to agree to the teachings of the church, completely and absolutely. This is under that horrible shadow that was under us, which is that we were intrinsically disordered. You know, so we were supposed to buy into that label that we were given, and to also say, oh yes, we absolutely believe in the teachings of the church. You know, we comply with it. And because we as an organization didn't agree to that statement that we were asked to make, we were taken out of the directory. So it was at that point that this label was constantly thrown at us. So when I met the then Archbishop Nichols, he brought it up. I had this little quiet sigh, and I said, yes, I believe something did happen in the past, and I do believe we're not there anymore. We have moved on, and we are in different places working openly and authentically to reach out to LGBT Catholics. I have to say it was a measured response from the Cardinal, but he offered us an opportunity to work with him. So he suggested that we work on the Emmaus story, which I viewed as, why not? Why shouldn't we work on the Emmaus story? We're not going to do it to please him. We're going to do it to see if it works for us. So we did at the following conference in 2014. We did do the Emmaus story. And it was an incredible conference, because I think for the first time, certainly in my time that I'm aware of, that the members were asked, what do you think? what do you feel about your church? What do you feel about Quest? What do you feel about your faith? What are the things that have hurt you and what are the things that work for you? So it was a wonderful, wonderful series of workshops we did where people really were able to be open and honest about their feelings. And if I can give you an insight, and it's a personal insight, is that I feel that within Quest, we've always tried to be a bit like the church, which is to be very respectful of people in authority, to not criticize. We may hate things, we don't particularly say it. And I think our membership was very much like that. Although I have to tell you, when I became chair, which is really interesting, our membership dropped quite dramatically. I understand these were long-standing members of the organization who saw it as a reflection of themselves. And then suddenly along comes this new chair who isn't a man, isn't particularly white. And so there's this slight mismatch for them. The organization or the head of it didn't particularly reflect them. And they were also of an age where perhaps, you know, life has moved on. So I respected that, but it said something. And by the way, I'm not alone in this because I know Ruth Hunt, when she was CEO of Stonewall, had the same issue. Membership dropped, funding dropped massively, but you rebuild the organization and you move it forwards. And certainly that's what we were going to do in Quest. So that happened, the MA story happened, it was a success for us. We weren't doing it for anyone else, we were doing it for ourselves. But out of politeness, the following year, we went back to the Cardinal and presented him with the MA story. And this time, Deputy Chair was lovely Nick Boychel, who's actually here in the meeting. So, you know, that was really, really important, that this sense of us working with the hierarchy, but on our own terms, needed to happen. And that I felt was a success for us as an organization. Now, I'm just going to quickly run through some of the other things that we did. As I said, I made it a policy to meet with bishops wherever we had a local group, and met with Bishop Patrick McKinney in October 2016. And I always went with someone from a local group because my job as a chair was just to make the introduction that this is Quest and here's a member from the local group. And then the local group connects with the bishop and, you know, very successfully, Claire, who's here, worked and continues to work with the bishop and they hold a mass. Which was held at the time. And I think we had about 200 people who came to the cathedral. It was on a Saturday, so it wasn't a Sunday mass as such. It was a mass specially held for LGBT Catholics, friends and families. And about 200 people came, which was wonderful. You know, we had members from Quest, of course, quite rightly, who came to support it. But the majority of people who were there were members from the LGBT community, their friends and families. And that's now a regular an annual mass. And then this is an interesting one. Kieran, who's also with us today, and I met with Archbishop Bernard Longey in 2017. I have to tell you, out of all the bishops I met, he pulled out all the stops, welcomed us, had a lovely silver service, cakes and sandwiches, all of that. Very, very nice. But actually nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. You know, and interestingly, Archbishop Longey was very involved in the initiative for the LGBT Mass in London. But somehow within his role, you know, as Archbishop in Birmingham, you know, we still wait for something maybe that will happen in the future. And then I met with Bishop Arnold of Salford in 2017 with the wonderful Jez, who's a convener for that region, who sadly, tragically passed away very recently. Met with him, very, very interesting. Always, the conversations and the meetings are always cordial, very much wanting to listen, to hear what's being said and to find ways of working together. And in that time, I was very involved with the Stonewall Role Models project, which is about people going into schools to talk about being a member of the LGBT community, meeting young kids, basically. That for me was really, really an important thing to do, because I've taught in colleges and I've taught at universities, but I've never taught in a school. College and university, you can talk about these issues. In a school setup, it used to be very difficult, but certainly with LGBT month, those opportunities were created, and I've talked in quite a few schools, and it was always an occasion when the teacher would come up and say, by the way, I need to tell you I'm gay. I haven't told the school yet. And I said, oh, okay, maybe in conversations you could talk about that, It's been difficult for teachers, I know, particularly in Catholic schools. It is very, very difficult for them to open up and talk about being gay. Yet those opportunities for students to talk about sexuality and homosexuality are there. I'm not sure this project runs anymore with Stonewall, but I know other groups do that. They do go into schools to talk. So I think that's a really, really important initiative within the education system. Now, when I met the Archbishop, Cardinal Nichols, or Cardinal Nichols as he is now, I suggested that what really needs to happen, that there needs to be a poster, a notice in Westminster Cathedral. And the reason for that was because he was very supportive of the LGBT Mass in London, but he also supports courage, the official teachings of the church followed by courage. And they have a notice up at Westminster Cathedral. And I did say to the Cardinal, I said, don't you think it's fair that if you are going to support courage and support the LGBT Mass, surely we should have a notice up in the cathedral? And he agreed to it. He said, yes, let's do it. But it took a long time for the notice to be approved because there were initially meant to be 3 groups, Courage, Quest, and the Westminster LGBT group. Courage, thankfully, said no to being in the poster. They didn't want to be associated with dissenting groups. So thank God we didn't have to have them in there. But it took a while to get this done because Westminster group were not sure how to do it. They didn't know about their logo. But I mean, cut long story short, it went up. But it didn't stay up for long because every time it was put up on the board, it was pulled down. I think it was pulled down about 3 or 4 times till eventually it was put behind glass. And I thought I must get a picture of it to show that finally we are in the, as a notice in the cathedral. I mean, if I'd taken a wider shot, you would have seen on to the right, Courage are up there as well. But hey, Quest are in Westminster Cathedral, so that's really important. Now, I have to say the only negative, or rather non-response I've gotten is from Bishop Portsmouth Philip Egan. We don't have a group locally, but I wrote to him nonetheless saying, hello, here we are. Wouldn't it be lovely to have a conversation? And the reason why I did that was because previous to that, I had Kieran, who's here, who did the opening prayer. Kieran and I went to meet in, when was it, 2018. We went to meet with a pastoral care service in just outside of Portsmouth. And they were very keen to do a day conference for clergy, and they wanted Quest to be involved. So there were lots of conversations happening, and there was lots of preparation. And we were pretty much getting to the stage where, yes, it was going to happen. And then at the last minute, we were asked if we, Quest, would uninvite ourselves from the conference. And I wrote back to the priests concerned and I said, we didn't invite ourselves, you did. We'd love to work with you. We certainly won't turn up, if you don't want us there, but we'd like to continue to work with you. And this was directly to do with the bishop. He didn't want this event to happen, or rather he didn't want Quest involved in the event. So that was the only, I guess, for me, the negative that we had on that point. Yeah, less said about that, the better. Then 2018, we had a conference where Bishop Doyle from Northampton was there. And he was actually the first bishop I ever went to meet after meeting the Cardinal Nichols. He was wonderful, and very welcoming. And so when the opportunity arose, for our conference in 2018, he agreed to be one of the keynote speakers. And it was a wonderful event. We had lots of amazing speakers there. We had James Allison, we had Claire Watkins, and we had a video from Father James Martin. Initially, it was going to be a live link, but he couldn't do it, so we had a pre-recorded video from him. And it was a wonderful, wonderful event. But, anytime something good happens and is a success, you get a little bit of a kickback. And the kickback was from Light Sight, who were really angry that a bishop had spoken at conference, and they took great umbrage by this little visual graphic that we had. They said, "Can you not see the notions of paedophilia involved there? There's an older man and a younger man, two hands meeting." And I thought, wow, really? You had to look for that desperately? But they were looking for something to criticize us with. And, you could look into that and say, well, ooh, are you saying that because of the flag on the right, which is to do with the Vatican, that's a priest? And is that a woman's hand or is that a young man's hand? You can read all kinds of nonsense into it. It was a very honest and, innocent image, but they needed to find something in there. And they attacked Bishop Doyle as well, and I did email him, and he said, "Listen, I've heard worse, but I'm really pleased I did it. I have no regrets." So that was wonderful. So for the first time, openly and officially, we had a bishop at our conference. The late Bishop Archbishop Peter Smith from Southwark, he was also very welcoming, but he couldn't do anything because he was due for retirement and was waiting for his successor to come along. But what he did do was that he created an opportunity for Quest to go and talk to deacons. Again, first time Quest have done something like that very openly, publicly, I should say. So that was a positive for Quest. Now this is a wonderful story. Bishop Declan Lang from Clifton Diocese in Bristol. I met him in November. We had a Quest member there, and that was in November, and by March, as you can see on the poster, he held the first LGBT Mass. So that was really fast tracking, wonderful. And that's a regular Mass that they were initially just going to do it for several months, but now it's an ongoing rolling Mass that they have. A wonderful, wonderful initiative. And now we actually do have a regional group, a Quest group there on the outcome of this Mass, which was great. Now, I knew that I would be stepping down as chair, but I just needed certain things to happen before I left. And I was telling someone the other day, I've never thought of myself as ambitious, but looking back on this, I think perhaps there was a level of ambition to get things done before I left. And this Conscience Day conference on conscience was something we'd been working on for several years. And it was a wonderful success. Originally, we were supposed to have Auxiliary Bishop John Sherrington, who was with us all the way through. And the initial date we had to be cancelled. I can't remember for what reason. Something came up and we couldn't do it. And the next date that we set, Bishop just couldn't. He wasn't available. So we got Father Keith Baltrop, Monsignor Baltrop, who's the liaison for the LGBT community in Westminster. A great success, and I'm really pleased we held it in Moorfields in London, and Father Chris Vipers was incredibly generous with his time and offering us the resources. So again, really important that we're working with the hierarchy as an organization. It's a good thing for us to do. And then soon after that, we held our conference, a Quest conference, and that's when I stepped down. And the picture on the left is 4 of the Quest chairs. We weren't drunk, we were just desperate for something, but there was no alcohol available. And it was a fun session. It was on family, the conference, and I was really thrilled that, you know, 2 members of my family were able to be there as well for that conference. And I'm shaking hands with the new chair, Gerard, who's in the meeting here as well. And I have to say that the meeting we had with Bishop John Arnold from Salford, it took a couple of years, but then he did do a mass in October 2019 in Manchester. I wasn't chair anymore by then, but you know, I felt it'd be a lovely thing to go to, and it was great. And again, that's going to be a regular mass that's held as a group have come together who will work at coordinating the mass for LGBT families and friends. So that was the end of my time with Quest. I had been involved and gotten involved with Global Network of Rainbow Catholics. And yes, just a little anecdote on this to say that I met, I had 2 friends who were on the committee who'd co-authored a book by the European Forum, and they were going to launch it in Rome. And I wasn't sure I had the time or the money to go, but I wanted to go because they were my friends. And the committee, the Quest committee said, yes, you should go and we'll pay for you to go. And I said, oh, this is great. I could go and support my friends. And that's the only reason I went. But, you know, I always feel like God's got these plans in mind for me, and I seem to just go with it. I went there to support my friends. I ended up being on the committee, the steering committee for the Global Network of Rainbow Catholics. I hadn't a clue who they were, what they did. I was amazed when I was there at what they did, and I just willingly went into it. And I became the co-chair of the organization, and we meet face-to-face if we can every 2 years. We meet almost every day online for meetings galore. And so we have we've got 48 member groups from around the world. And in terms of sheer numbers, I don't know what it is, because each group has, you know, massive number of members within them. But certainly we're looking at, you know, a membership in probably 400 or 500 individuals involved. Now, in terms of women, you know, you may have noticed in all the images I was showing you of meeting bishops, I'm the only woman there. It's always with other men. You know, GNRC has its absolute policy about equality and representation on the board, which is great. But in reality, in terms of the membership, we don't know how many women are there. And invariably, they're generally all men. In all the leadership roles, it's men, men, men. And then they'll find a few women, you know, to be put forward for leadership roles on the board or whatever. And that bothers me hugely. So we decided, or rather I decided, that we need to have a women's committee. And it's a really vibrant, active group of women from all around the world who are really working to ensure that the organization doesn't just have a mission statement that says we are into equality and representation of all genders and sexual identities, but really that in practice and in policy and in action, that's what we are. And so that's what the Women Committee is absolutely involved in. We're organizing our pre-conference in Chicago in 2022 for women, specifically for women and by women. And we're going to reach out to women's groups in Mexico. We're certainly been working very actively on changing the constitution so that it reflects those ethoses and ideologies really for the organization. And you know, it's an ongoing kind of issue and battle. You know, how do you truly reflect the society that you live in? Not just those who are prominent, you know, in the public sphere, but that actually inhabit and exist. and certainly within the LGBT community, it's no different to any community. It has its subsections and divisions and separations, and if we call ourselves equal, then we have to truly be that, not just in name, but in action and in deed. So that's my a lot of my time is taken up with global networks, and in the meantime, as my intro said, I'm from India. I strongly identify as an Indian, although I've lived most of my life in England. I go back to India a lot, and I'd met with Cardinal Oswald Bracious several times. He's very interested and supportive of the LGBT community. He's often spoken out for women, for the LGBT community, despite the animosity and rhetoric that comes out from the incredibly right-wing Indian government that's there at the moment. I asked, I told him we were going to set up a group, and he said, well, that would be good, and he gave our blessings. And when I met up with him again in 2018 with the gentleman called Wendell Rodericks, who is a fashion designer, really well established, and received the Padma Shri, which is the second highest award you can get in India. Gay man, openly gay, married for 30 years with his husband, who's from France, but they live in India. And Wendell was very keen to support the setting up this group. So we met with Cardinal Bracious, and he gave our blessings to the group. And so we went ahead and did it. We were going to do it anyway, but we just thought it'd be nice for the Cardinal to know about it. Sadly, Wendell passed away just over a year ago, tragically, but the group carries on. We've had several meetings online. Some good people there, and you might recognize Virginia Saldana, who's one of the members who helps us out. So we're working a lot with the National Council for Christian Churches in India. Amazing, not Catholics, but other Christian groups who do the most incredible work. So we're working very closely with them on doing several programs on parents of LGBT who are afraid, who are in the dark, or who are angry, but don't know how to deal with having a gay child. So we really want to reach out to them and explore all the issues and offer them the materials and resources to make informed decisions about their lives. Okay, so I think I've only got a few more minutes, so I better rattle on. So that's me. And so really the first screen I had was having all these big images up, logos. And as you can see, the Quest one, it becomes smaller and smaller, the National Quest group, because I'm a member, but I'm not on the committee. Whereas the bottom right-hand one is the local London group that I'm now the convener for. So I spend a lot of my time on that. And the rest of my time is equally shared with the global network of Rainbow Catholics and the Rainbow Catholics in India. So that takes up quite a lot of my time. And in all of that, it's always about where's the sense of who I am within these groups? Where are the women? Where are the people of color? Where are the trans women? Where are, I can see all the men. I can always see the men, and they have a rightful place there, but where are the others? The ones that don't happen to be there, where are they? We need to find them. So that's really all that I've been trying to do and continue to do. And that's my story. Thank you.